someone was kind of like, this should be a podcast. And we were like, yeah, it should. And we went to Salesforce and we were like, we're about to launch this badass podcast, either in or out. You want to sponsor it? And they said yes.
Hi, everyone. On this episode, I have Stephanie Postles. She's the CEO of Mission.org, a service that creates podcasts, shows for the enterprise. So some accolades. Some of her podcasts have been top 20 ranking in her categories, top tech, marketing, and business podcasts, boasting 4 million plus downloads annually. A lot of the listeners include C-level executives from Fortune 1000. And the agency, the company's produced 600 plus episodes with industry-leading executives being interviewed, and won Best of the Year Apple for 2 of your podcasts. Amazing. And that's an amazing accomplishment. How welcome to the show, and how long have you been doing this?
Thanks for having me, man. I need to have you introduce me wherever I go. It's kind of like,
just record this.
Yeah.
You'll take this snippet with you.
Let me let Peck take it from here. How long have I been doing this? So Mission was started in 2017 as a Medium publication, but I maybe can kind of start even before then of like where it came from. And, so back in, what year was that? Like 2011, I was graduating college and was recruited by a company called Fannie Mae, which many may know, working in finance and economics there. And was doing this like rotational program and was quite bored. And I ended up landing in like an economics group, and it was just a bunch of the same kind of people there. Everyone had PhDs except for me. We were writing these housing reports. I was writing them, but I was like an intern basically. And I'm like, should I really be saying where the housing market is headed? And everyone's like betting on what I'm saying. So it was a very weird experience. And then I just started getting bored. So I started working on side projects and, working on apps, working on writing, helping write books. So I was just kind of was like dabbling, like creating a college majors app, creating just like a funny app that's like, we're not going to talk about that here. It's a little, we don't want to talk about that
A
here.
little inappropriate.
A little inappropriate. Just channel me back to my immature days. But then Google reached out and they were like, hey, we see you're working at Fannie Mae. We don't really care about that. But we also see you working on all these side projects. That's cool. Like, can we, fly you out to Mountain View, their main campus in Cali, and, interview you for some of these roles? So right when I was about to fly out to Google, Fannie Mae let me go because they let go of anyone that didn't have PhDs. Because they're like, if you're going to work in econ under the Office of the Chief Economist, essentially, like, we need a certain kind of person. I mean, they didn't tell me directly, but it was pretty obvious, like, who and why people got let go. And, so thankfully, I was on my way to Google, like, fingers crossed, like I get this job. Interviewed with about 6 teams there, YouTube, Chrome, Maps, a bunch of others. Got almost all 6 offers from everyone I interviewed with. And
look at you.
Yeah, so it was cool. I picked the most startup-ish role on the Google Maps team, running the P&L there. It's like $1 billion P&L, working on Street View and Maps. And we were acquiring a satellite company at the time called Skybox. And so it was just, they kind of said, like, you can come in. We've never had finance help before. Just like do whatever you want. Partner with these product teams. Figure out how many Street View cars they need. Figure out how to acquire this satellite company and like figure out the business model. And it kind of let me do and go wherever I wanted, which was awesome. Like, I really felt like I was like a mini entrepreneur within this big team because they didn't know how to utilize me. So I just got like what I
Well, this went on a tangent. What is Google Maps' business model? I actually don't know.
They have many, many business models. It all just kind of, there's a lot. So there's just tons. Like, if you think of Maps, it's not just Maps. There's probably like 50 different teams within that group, within like the Maps and Geo division. So I was working with all of them, but they've got like people who partner with local businesses. They've got the ad side. They have a lot. So, and like when we were acquiring that satellite company, they had a whole different business model. So it was just kind of a lot of things going on at once. But then getting back to Mission now. So when I was at Google, I once again started getting that itch again of like, okay, I love Google. It's super fun. I have a lot of opportunities here, but I just feel like I want to like do my own thing and work on my own thing. And so on the side, my old co-founder and I, we started a publication on a platform called Medium, which was like pretty early days. Like, not many people were on there. And we just started writing on there and writing things that we cared about, which was always around like a lot of self-help stuff in the beginning, but then it kind of shifted to business, entrepreneurs, and we started crafting this series called The Story. And our whole thought behind it was that everyone thinks they know the end results. They see people, IPOing and having these huge companies and they're super wealthy and they're billionaires. And a lot of times people don't know how they actually got there. They don't know the struggles they went through. They don't know the story behind that person. So we started crafting these series where we would tell the unknown backstory of people who changed the world, and we would keep their identity hidden until the end. And we would showcase, someone like an Elon Musk or a Sarah Blakely up against someone like you, and kind of showing like pretty similar, like everyone goes through struggles. It's not a one-hit wonder. I mean, we told the story of Angry Birds. I mean, people hear Angry Birds and they're like, oh my gosh, they're like huge company now. Those founders did so well. All the swag they're selling, like merchandise, makes up a huge percent of their sales now. And you think that was easy for them. So we wrote a whole article called 52 Attempts, showing it took them 52 times of trying to launch a game before they got
they were making Nokia games, and
Yeah.
then this was like a new platform, I think, and they were almost going out of business or something,
Yep.
right?
Yeah. And so that's the stories that we wanted to tell. So it started doing really well on Medium. We started getting a lot of followers. A lot of people wanted to write for our publication. And we shifted the name. It was originally called Life Learning. It shifted over to be called Mission.org. And then I forget how this happened. I think someone was kind of like, this should be a podcast. And we were like, yeah, it should. And I was still at Google at the time. My old co-founder was working on it full time. And we were just like, we should do it. So we essentially took this written article or the written series, and we went to Salesforce and we were like, we're about to launch this badass podcast, either in or out. Do you want to sponsor it? And they said yes. And that was our first sale.
Wow, you just went straight to the top.
We did. Yeah. Cold emails. Who knew? They can take you
cold
really far.
emails straight to the top.
Yeah.
Take it from Stephanie. It worked for her.
Yeah. I mean, and we do that all the time still. Like we still cold email people to get guests on our shows. We have now we have a network of 14 podcasts and 3 that we're under development right now that we're working on. And we partner with big brands like Salesforce. So we work with 6 different teams at Salesforce. They all have their own shows that they sponsor of ours. We work with Highland Software. We work with Splunk. Like there's a lot of companies we work with now. And it all started from that first deal with Salesforce that we were able to then point back and be like, look, we have a big brand who loves what we're doing. We have a podcast. The Story was the one that, won Best of Year by Apple. We had Alec Baldwin narrating it. We had Jeffrey Wright from Westworld narrating it. So it turned into this big thing. And then once you have one thing under your belt like that, it definitely gets a lot easier. And so, now today, just knocking out more podcasts and finding really cool companies to partner with who, see podcasting as the perfect avenue, whether it's connecting with customers or prospects or content. And of course, like thought leadership, we are able to create everything from start to finish, and we do everything for them, and they can kind of plug and play how they want, depending on what their KPIs are on the show.
Yeah, it's a turnkey podcast service.
Yep.
But the unique thing I thought about your business is, I own a service-based agency, but whatever I do really belongs to the client.
Mm-hmm.
Your model is a service-based agency, but you end up owning the podcast and the IP. Yep. And even though it's their show, somehow you kept the IP, which is great.
Yeah,
help me with that.
So that was a really conscious decision in the very beginning. I mean, I think there are many companies out there who can just create a podcast for you. And there are many podcasts that just die. I mean, new podcasts are getting launched every day. Big corporate companies are launching podcasts all the time. Like it can be done. And our whole point behind owning the actual content and the show was because we didn't want corporate creep to come into play. If we have, a large Fortune 500 company comes in and they want to work with us, and we call it a partnership because it is. I mean, they get to help drive the content, drive the guest flow. They get to introduce people and like give them an opportunity to come on a show that's ranking in like top 10 of tech. So they want to be a part of it, but we also know that we don't want our sponsors too close. We don't want it to turn into a big corporate message from a company that people don't want to hear that. They want to hear from the best people in that industry. If they want to hear from marketing, they want to hear from top CMOs. They don't want to hear a constant sales pitch. And over time, almost any corporate show I've listened to
turns into that. Yeah.
It turns into that. Yeah. Because you're just biased and the host is from there and they end up just having a lot of inside baseball questions, and they don't want to ask hard questions to their prospects, and
Yeah.
they don't want to like put their customers on the spot. And so we just saw a model where it wasn't really working out well because of this bias, and we always called it the corporate graveyard, and just kind of showed all the brands that tried to launch their own podcasts, and it just didn't work. And so, yeah, it's a perfect model, and all of our partners so far love it because it also takes the liability off of them. Like it's a mission owned show. But if someone comes and is like, whoa, all of a sudden our PR team, even though they approved it, now we're not so sure about it anymore. Like it comes back to us and we deal with all of that. Because the biggest thing a lot of these companies have, even though they're huge, is they don't just have unlimited headcount. They don't have, unlimited design bandwidth. I mean, the types of things these big companies actually kind of are lacking is all the support to run an entire show. I mean, it takes many people. I mean, now, Peck, you have a show, like it can be producers, designers. Do you have your audio engineer? Do you have someone helping with booking? I mean, especially with,
I don't have any of that. Not
you
yet.
need it. You will get there. You will get there. I mean, when you're doing like as many shows as we are, and most of them release twice a week, and because of the type of people we're going after, usually Fortune 1000 execs, like they can be booking us like 6 months in advance. And so we're always having to like, for every 2 people that need to come on that week, we're probably talking to 25. So it takes a lot. And yeah, all the companies we work with, they've all been partners of ours for a couple years now. And yeah, they've stayed with us because I think they see what it takes to run a show, and they're kind of like, you guys are the experts. And yeah, we'll just, plug and play when we can.
Yeah, and then the other benefit too is, when leadership changes or budgets change or stock price dips, like you might just have we're not doing podcasts anymore, and then you lose all that IP or
Exactly.
like all that content just goes away because there's no, it kind of, like you said, dies on the grapevine.
I mean, that's why, yeah, a lot of our sponsors say the same thing. It's like 1 second your team could get reorged, and then all of a sudden it's not a priority, and then the podcast is like gone. It's, someone doesn't pay the bill, the RSS feed's gone, no one knows how to access it. And this happens quite often with, especially when people have budgets that are moving around. And with us, they actually like it that we're like, yeah, you're the sponsor for the year, and you can continue to, renew that sponsorship if you want. But if you don't do that, we have a list of competitors we would never resell it to. However, it's in all of our best interest to keep the show going because most of the content we create is evergreen. And like you would always want those first 300 episodes to continue living on, even if that means we're bringing on a different sponsor in 5 years. Like it's better for everyone. And yeah, the best companies, I think, realize that and have been okay with that.
Yeah. I mean, that's the same reason I created the design podcasts outside of Impeccable, right? Otherwise it'd be kind of weird to, right. You couldn't ask the tough questions, or it wouldn't make sense to interview another agency owner. Why would you talk to a competitor, right? Like, yeah. But if it's pure and kind of outside the realm of Impeccable, I think it just like there's no conflict of interest.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Like we have, so one of the shows that I host, it's a e-commerce podcast. We bring on e-commerce leaders, and it is sponsored by Salesforce Commerce Cloud. But like the people that are coming on, they're on Shopify, they're on Wix, like they're on all these things. And I mean, it's well known that we are going to have people, just the best people on. I don't care what platform you're on. Like we're having the best people on the show, and our sponsors are all fine with that. They're like, yeah, of course, we're not going to try and control the market and the messaging. Like we just, talk to whoever you want, Steph. It's going to be a great interview. So that's the kind of people that we look for are, ones that aren't scared of being like, if they want it to turn into a certain kind of message and they want it to be a certain way, I'm like, you should probably do your own
Probably
thing.
not.
That's not why we're here.
Yeah. You want to be an industry leader, an industry podcast, not a spokesperson for a certain SaaS or something.
Yep. Yeah. And now with the amount of shows we have in our network, I think the advantage we get is booking power of just, we launch a new show. We're about to launch a new one with Highland, and instantly within the first, 5 episodes, we've got huge names. We've got PwC, we've got Intel, we've got Deloitte. I mean, because these people have been on our other shows before, every new show we launch, it's like, okay, we can just tap into the companies that have already been on the show. They had a great experience with us. Let's get on their CMO now. Let's get on their CEO. And so you definitely start having compounding results when you get going.
We're going to dive into another topic. You and your co-founder are a couple, right? When you first started the company.
Yes, we were. Yep.
That's a pretty unique one, and usually I think would say a red flag for investors. Actually, speaking of investment, like did you ever get investment, or what was the story there?
Yeah, so in 2018, we did get, I was actually pregnant, which scared some investors. pretty funny. I'm like walking in, they're like, "Ooh, how far along are you?" I'm like, 7 months. I got time. And you could definitely see the people it made uncomfortable. But then we did have some good investors, Founders Fund, Sequoia Scouts, Andy Dunn. Was at Bonobos, now Walmart maybe, and one other person. But they all put in very small amounts of money and convertible notes. So they don't actually own equity in our company. It only converts to equity if I were to do a priced round or IPO or something. So that's how we did it, and I like that model. It works out great. I like retaining ownership of the company and yeah, finding investors who are helpful and want to step in and know the industry and the market without cutting into the
Well,
equity.
is there any tacit implication that you're going to raise more or?
Not right now. I mean, yeah, like we'll see depending on the path that we're headed right now. But I mean, we're profitable and yeah, right now just focused on like reinvesting any profits back into the company. And yeah, depending on where we go, I mean, there's certain models we want to get into around events and leveraging, tapping into our network. We used to do these roundtables all the time where we would have, 4 CIOs come in and we would do like a bourbon tasting or, three CMOs come in and have a live podcast recording while doing like a wine Wednesday type thing. So we would always do this pre-COVID, and there was a lot of good energy there, really good episodes that would come out of it, good relationships where someone's like, oh, I never would have, thought that I could have the CMO of this big company and the CMO of so-and-so meeting and then have a, friendship afterwards. So I'm seeing ways that we can get back into that once things start to calm down a bit more around the pandemic. But yeah, right now, not focused on raising money, just focused on building out new shows, finding great partners, and, scaling the team up.
Off topic, like speaking of events and bourbon and other settings, something that I watched last night was on YouTube. They get two actors to be on a show, and they're eating hot wings while being asked questions.
Yeah,
You
hot
see
ones?
them?
Is
The
that what
hot
it's
ones?
called? The
Yeah,
hot
yeah. I
ones?
thought that
Yeah.
was hilarious because they're
Yeah.
fighting the heat of the chicken wing and then trying to answer difficult questions. So
Yep.
that's made for a
Yeah.
fun show.
I mean, think about, how like you remember that afterwards. Those people now have a relationship and yeah. So yeah, really fun. There are things like that I want to get into, but not rushing too hard that it'll kill, our team and put too much on them right now.
Yeah.
But I didn't answer your relationship question.
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, and then double clicking into kind of that note when you said you're 7 months pregnant, and some of the investors were like, "Whoa."
Yep.
Like, how did that make you feel? Being a female entrepreneur, and like, if a man said, "Hey, my wife is 7 months pregnant," that probably wouldn't raise any eyebrows.
Yeah, I know. I mean, that's one thing I've always kind of thought about. So, of course, our investors did not care. I mean, I remember going in. What was this? I might have even brought our son. Oh, I did bring Grayson in to our first. We were trying to raise an additional amount of money, and I remember bringing Grayson, my son, in because I was still feeding him, and I think he was about 2 months old. And our investor perfectly fine with that. Like he was like, awesome, like cool. I mean, he was just sitting there,
You gotta do what
looking
you gotta
around.
do.
But I know. I'm like, I can't leave him at home. I mean, he's super small and he's like eating every hour. So, but so the ones that we went with are amazing. But yeah, for the ones that acted like that, of course, I kind of get it. Like being a CEO of a company, you do kind of think about like, okay, what does this mean if like, this happens or this person has this life event or whatever. Like it's easy to kind of fall into that mindset. But you also have to think like longer term about people and not just view them as like a quick, oh, this one life like event is gonna like mess up the trajectory. Because like you said, I've never heard of someone saying, to a man like, oh, you have like, a month away from a baby coming, like not so sure, like how are you gonna make that happen? I just have never heard those conversations of like, well, what are your plans? Like, how are you gonna keep working? How are you gonna run a company?
Yeah.
I've never heard of that. I mean,
Yeah,
maybe
it's a BS double standard.
yeah. So I mean, yeah, but I think it's getting better. I mean, I'm definitely not the type of person to be like, oh, all these guys are like that. Like we've had amazing support around this, and yeah, like my team and my old co-founder, not my ex, but my old co-founder Ian, like so much support around like my kids because now I have 3 under 3, and yeah, there's a lot of people who step in and they like love watching that, love supporting, and they've seen me do it while running a company too. And yeah, I think sometimes there's a lot of standards put on women of like, oh, you need to take maternity leave for this long. It's like, well, why? Like, if I want to, I can, but I'm also like a very antsy person. And if 2 weeks in, I want to check my email and check in on my team, like, why is there this standard that I have to do that? Or maybe I want to take a really long one. Maybe I want a year off. Like, I feel like any way it should be normal. You should be able to choose what you want without, always having other people come in and be like, how's this going to happen? Or you should make this happen. It's just everyone's got ideas.
Yeah, yeah. And well, it's your company, and the reason you keep control and ownership of it is so you can do it the way you see fit.
Hmm.
And part of this podcast is kind of like your Medium posts and articles are just showcasing the different stories of entrepreneurs and the differences, and
Yeah.
trying to highlight, not just like white male Stanford grad, entrepreneurs, but kind of like the, not like
Yeah.
$1 billion unicorn stories,
Yeah.
or
Which I
like the
love them too.
massive. Yeah, I mean, they're great and all, but it's,
Yeah.
I don't know if people, like, you put those on a pedestal, right? You put Angry Birds or Elon Musk on a pedestal, and you can't relate to them, or at least I cannot relate to them, right? It's
Hmm.
like, I don't have any grandiose mission to colonize moon or Mars or, space. I'm just a little guy trying to make it in the galaxy here, with a small business, and now like a nascent podcast.
Hmm.
And so it's like, I just want to tell relatable stories.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of stories, that go untold that could be really inspirational for people to hear about. And I mean, every company definitely goes through hard times. Every CEO probably has very hard times that they reflect back on and sometimes probably want to forget about. And, but yeah, they're helpful to share, I think.
Well, speaking of hard times, what were some of your hard times at Mission? Were there any times you said this is not worth it, or they were thinking about it?
Yeah. I mean, let's see. So we definitely had a hard time about last year when things started going a little bad with my ex that I co-founded it with, and we were going through a divorce, and there was just things going on there that was causing the company some issues. Where at one point we were very close to bankruptcy, like very, very close to it. And I remember Christmas coming around, and I was like, we're not going to make it through Christmas. Like, we will not make this payroll. And if you think through the time of events, I was pregnant and the twins were coming via C-section in February, and it was December. And so I'm like, okay, had just left Google maybe like many months before that because we had gotten benefits for our company. I felt safe. I had Grayson at Google, so it was great. It was easy. And yeah, it was December and Christmas time. And I'm like, okay, we're not going to make this payroll. If we don't make payroll, there goes benefits. What am I going to do for my kids and I? Like, a C-section is very expensive, and all of us are on, missions, yeah, payroll. And so I put in a big loan into the company so that we could make payroll for the team because I didn't want to lay anyone off during Christmas. Yeah, put in my own money and got past that payroll cycle, started applying for a bunch of loans to meet payroll, knew that they weren't going to come in time, and like to be able to make the one in January, like January 15th. So yeah, I had to start laying off almost half the team. Well, it was half the team, which was hard because they were all my friends. And it was
Yeah.
hard because a lot of the things that had happened were kind of out of my control. Yeah, because I wasn't CEO then. I didn't have majority equity. Like, there was just a lot of things that were happening that, kind of, yeah, like I was a little bit, couldn't control it, which I am kind of a control freak. I like knowing that, like, I'm choosing my own destiny, all the things I'm doing, right or wrong, it's because of me. And this was like a very different experience. So yeah, I had to have all those conversations with a lot of amazing people and just tell them, like, it's definitely not performance. It's nothing. It's literally like our company just doesn't have money anymore. And here's why. And um, yeah, so, and a lot of these people now I'm still like great friends with. I meet up with them in Austin all the time, and they found like really cool things that they're working on. So they're good now. But I just remember that being heartbreaking. I mean, imagine laying off half your team that you've been working with for like a year or two, that you've gone on offsites with, that you've had over at your house where they've met your kids, and we just had this really close bond. And yeah, so that was really, really hard. And yeah, then I just had to start rebuilding the company. I took over as CEO. I started shifting our customers into 1-year contracts because one of the big issues we had was like lack of predictability. We were doing these quarterly arrangements. And every quarter it's like, okay, did you guys get budget? Because we're already working ahead. We're already booking people like 6 months, a year out.
Right.
And
The booking doesn't match the
exactly.
payments.
Yeah. So it's just kind of like a weird structure where I'm like, why am I doing it this way? I mean, we are working so far out in the future. We can't have it where we're waiting. We don't stop production. Like, it's not what's in the best interest of the show. Even if like payments don't come in, we were essentially floating companies. And they were like, oh, yeah, it'll come. And then like,
Oftentimes billion-dollar companies.
yes. Yeah. And it'd be like, oh, net 90. I'm like, I can't wait 90 days because our team is still working and we're running ads for you and all this stuff. It's like, we're already so far in the hole. So yeah, I started telling them like, we need to do 1 year contracts. I mean, and they'd already been clients for over a year. So it's like, they knew how we worked. They saw the success. Yeah, they had really good numbers that they could tie to show the performance of the shows that they sponsored. Because a lot of them tie it to maybe pipeline acceleration and ABM and customer stories and stuff. So all the success metrics were there. It's just I hadn't even thought to like ask for that because I was just kind of like, oh, you're a big company, like, I will kind of go by your rules. And then I had to kind of get a little like, okay, no, it's not going to work for me because I need this company and this is my baby and I can't let, me not asking lead to the demise of it. So yeah, I just went out and started asking all the companies like, this is how it has to be and here's why. And all of them said yes. They were like, yeah, of course, that's a no-brainer. We want to work with you guys. And they want to lock in prices too. They're like, we don't want you to come back like the next quarter and jack up prices. So like, it's in everyone's best interest.
Yeah, I think aligning your practical needs to what they're looking for. We're going through the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, big companies kind of throw their weight around
Mhm.
sometimes, and yeah, the net 90 is something that we deal with.
Mm.
I was just on a call today, and like one client hadn't paid us, it's like since September, and like, oh man, it's
Wow.
it's like okay,
Yeah.
it's not, so yeah, it's being the small little company, sometimes you have to kind of put your foot down and like, you appreciate working with us, you
Mhm.
want us to exist, you want us to be financially secure, you be around to help you, then you gotta do what you gotta do.
Yeah. But a lot of times it's actually just asking, I think. Like, you just are like, oh, this must be the process. I mean, I interview a lot of people who have big e-commerce companies and they talk about the same thing of like entering into retail and the retail stores being like, this is how it is. This is where your product's going and making them do all this work and then being like, oh, we're just going to order 10 or something. And like, these are like big brands that I'm talking to where they're like, whoa, like, in the early days, I didn't even know to like ask for stuff. I'll be like, it has to be over, 100, or you have to put this in this kind of department or else we're not working with you. And yeah, I just think that's always a great lesson that oftentimes people will, agree with what you want or at least hear you out. And you don't have to be like stewing in bed, like, oh, should I ask this question or not? Or like, why didn't I do that? Like, just go for it. And if they say no, they say no.
Yeah, well, the biggest takeaway here from your episode here is like, well, just the cold emails, just going straight, asking Salesforce, and just
Yeah.
ask for it. Yeah, don't be afraid to ask for it. And
Yeah.
most, the worst you can say is no. And
Yep.
yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
So that was really tough. The situation. I've never been anything relatable other than, COVID did take us for a spin, and the stressful times we were seeing business dry up, but we didn't have the layoffs that you speak of.
Mhm.
So I can't even imagine what you went through, especially with friends. It's
Yeah.
been really
Yeah, that
tough.
makes it hard. I mean, I can see why it's easier for larger companies to lay people off when they don't have, that really close connection where they're like, oh, I got to lay off 20 people or whatever. And it's like they've never really spent so much time with them where it's like it hurt every person I laid off, I cried for. And some of them I cried on the phone with. And we were like crying together because they're like, they knew that I didn't want that to happen. And many of them offered to like work for free, which made it even harder because I'm like, yeah, I can't let you work
I
for
can't
free.
do that. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
But
not right. Yeah.
no, yeah, and yeah, didn't wanna they were like, "Oh, maybe you can pay me in the future." I'm like, "I can't guarantee that." Like, but it was just really sweet seeing these people who were so passionate and committed to working at the company and then knowing that, like, I literally couldn't do anything. But, I mean, to say that, like, it was a horrible experience, but also now when I look back on it, it was kind of a really good thing because we had to go down to half the team size, but maintain the same amount of clients. So it's like we didn't lose clients. We just, had to reduce the team size and things started getting really efficient. We dropped like the 20% of things that we shouldn't have been doing anyways. and focused really hard on just making sure that like our customers were super happy, the shows were amazing, the guests we were getting were badass, and we were ranking high in the charts. Like we just focused on like what are the things we're good at, and then let's stop dabbling in all the extra stuff that we're doing. That's either it's kind of like Google's like 20% projects. Like we all had them. We were all working on side stuff and for the company. And yeah, we just dropped a bunch of stuff and started figuring out how to communicate better and like project manage better and make things efficient. And I remember a guy that, Albert on my team, he went through and he mapped out like hours of every single person of like, here's what you're like, he would interview all of them and be like, tell me exactly what your day looks like, your week looks like. And then we would go through and cut things, be like, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, because you only have, 8 hours in a day. And let's just take out these things that are pushing it past your 8 hours. And so it got really efficient. And the team just started kind of flourishing more than they even were before because there was more accountability. And before there was like so many people and it was like a game sometimes of telephone. And it was just kind of like getting a little bit chaotic and people weren't, I would say, like being accountable to each other as much because it's like, oh, if I don't do it, maybe someone else will type thing. And then when it was half the size of the team, it's like, if I don't do it, it's not getting done. And I know, this one guy on our team is waiting and he knows it's just me.
Right. It's nobody else.
Yeah. So it was kind of a good lesson of like, how do you make sure things are efficient and don't get bloated? And then when you do need to scaling in a way, like scaling your team up in a way that makes sense and knowing, like, yeah, making the roles very different and making sure there's not too much overlap because that sometimes can cause drama and like competition. And I don't want competition around certain things. Some things are great, like having employees feel kind of competitive around work product. Other times it can actually be very bad. And you don't want people competing on something that's like, that's not even like, I don't want you guys doing that. I want you to collaborate or work on very separate things to like push everything forward. And so there's a lot of good lessons for that. And now as we're leaning back into growing the team again, the way I'm approaching it is very, very different of like, who do we need? What are they going to work on? Just a very different mindset than what it was a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I think COVID for us had a similar effect where because the resources were dwindled, we just couldn't afford to be wasteful. And we started kind of picking at everything and seeing what was, kind of like flipping every rock and trying to turn every stone and becoming way more efficient and being able to just do more with less.
Yep.
And I was just listening to a podcast episode, some SaaS founder, and it was, his two driving factors was like, how can I provide more value? And then how can I drive down costs, right? How can I get more done and be more efficient at it? And you kind of hit on that.
Yeah. And I think you kind of lose sight of that when you, start delegating a bunch and you have this whole team and you're giving them this freedom to like sign up for what you need, buy what you need. Like you start giving them a lot of freedom and then you kind of forget to like audit. Like, okay, wait, like every quarter, every month, whatever it may be, let's go in and look at this because even I'd say 6 months ago, we went in, my team member, I went in and we were looking at all the subscriptions and things on the credit card. And we're like, whoa, okay, here's a list of 50 things that I'm pretty sure no one's using. Like anyone, crickets? Okay, no. And you just kind of forget to do that when you're moving quick. So.
Yeah. Empower and audit, trust but verify. Yeah, there's a saying, but yeah, I think we're good at empowering, but then not having that accountability, empower, but also have it hold accountability.
Yeah, which makes sense because a lot of those team members don't have access to credit card statements, and they kind of will put credit cards in somewhere and they kind of forget what they did, and so it really is on the people who have that access to check in and review it and not be like, oh, why didn't you cancel that? It's like they probably forgot they even tried, signed up for that 7-day free trial, and now we're in it for a year.
Yeah, a great tool for that. Actually, an interview we just did as the founder CEO of Nacho, which is you can issue virtual credit cards. So you can create a virtual credit card for everything, for one-off things.
I'm gonna write that down.
Yeah, Nacho. Well, I'll send you the episode once that one goes live. But also, what's really cool, like a neat trick he taught me was like if there's something that has like a 30-day or 60-day free trial, you create a virtual credit card that expires in 30 days. So you can put in a credit card, but then when they because they have that free it's free, but put in your credit card. Well, you put in the credit card and then come 30 days, it tries to auto charge you for the next paying month. It can't. So
oh my gosh,
that's a good hack.
I need to look that up. That's great. Okay. I'll have to
Yeah,
look it
yeah.
up. That would be much
Um,
more helpful than right now I'm like doing it the old school way.
yeah, and then you issue cards for everyone. You can do it like the way we do it. We issue a card for a piece of software, right?
Hmm.
We're that granular
Oh, wow.
versus, or you can do it per person, right? Like, hey,
Yeah.
you have a person and a budget,
Hmm.
but it really depends,
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's kind of what we do. Of just, yeah, here's your credit
yeah,
card, and
yeah. I
yeah,
mean, I
for
used to
certain
like, hey,
people.
here's the company card, and
That's
then
yeah,
that's horrible.
yeah. You know, all the things that you look back on, you're like, not the best practices, but
Not at all, not at all. And then people, of course, hit the save button, right, on their
hmm.
browser, and then like, like,
What is this Macy's.com Urban Outfitters type
yeah,
of
yeah,
orders? Oh, you hit
yeah,
save.
yeah,
Got it.
yeah. And this person doesn't even work here anymore.
Yep.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about podcasting as a business a bit, because I'm getting into this. What are some
Yeah.
of the best, where you're like way ahead of the curve. You're during the pandemic. I think the number of podcasts have exploded. And
Mm-hmm.
me too, right? Like I'm
Yep.
part of that podcast Me Too movement. I gotta have one too. But what are some of the things that you've learned, best practices, and someone who's starting a podcast today you would tell?
Yeah. So we obviously work with larger brands. So like when it comes to individuals who are just like, oh, I maybe this would apply, but I'm also I know I'm biased because of who we, work with. But the biggest thing is always thinking about like goals. Like I think a lot of people want to start a podcast just to start a podcast. It's the cool thing to do now. Everyone has one, as you know, and they don't always think about like what are the goals and is this the best medium to do that? Like is this the best channel to get this message out there? And so yeah, I think thinking that through in the very beginning of like, do I need to do this? Because it does take a lot of work to make a podcast. And then if you're like, oh, and I also want it on YouTube, like, okay, if you're cutting an audio file up, are you going to cut that video file up too so it matches it for YouTube? Like, how do you, are you going to do both at the same time? And yeah, so just thinking through like what's the best format, because oftentimes I've talked to people who I'm like, you would be better starting on YouTube and seeing how that goes just based off of the visual nature of things that you're doing. Like, I don't know if a podcast would do it justice. Or maybe you should be on TikTok and just doing these quick things based on the product that you're selling. Like, I mean, yeah, so I think it just kind of depends on what you're selling and what your goals are. And yeah, like if do you actually need a podcast, or can you just go on other people's podcasts? Can you just start cold emailing people and be like, hey, pet, can I come on your show? Like, here's why. And I've had really good cold emails from people who are very creative, who I've invited on the show, even though maybe I wouldn't have traditionally prospected them to come on one of our shows. But they like this one woman sent me a video interview of herself, but it was like, hey, Stephanie, I just want to, I know you get a lot of emails and a lot of people want to come on your shows, but here's why you should let me on your show. And it was custom. And she really wanted to be on the show. And I was like, girl, you're in. Like, but I think things like that, where it's like, just pick the shows that you might want to be on and go big and cold email people. And maybe you can blanket a few shows with your message if you don't have like consistent content. So the first thing is around goals and like, is this the right channel? Um, and then consistency is key. Like I've seen a lot of people start a podcast and they're really excited in the early days of like, oh, I'm going to get, an episode recorded a day and it's going to be every day or once a week or whatever. And then they get burned out and then they pause and then they lose a lot of their listeners because, within a lot of the podcasting apps, if you don't download a couple episodes, you actually sometimes will get unsubscribed
Oh,
because
wow.
you're not interested. And yeah, so I think a lot of people don't really realize that like taking pauses can kind of hurt a show if you don't have big brand awareness, if you're not like a big seasonal thing where someone's like, I'm going to binge a season, I know they'll be back and I'm going to keep an eye out for it. Especially when it's like interview based and conversations, having that consistency where it's like, okay, every week this person's going to release an episode and I like it and I know when to expect it. And then maybe there's a newsletter tied to it that kind of reminds me, I'm on Monday that the episode's coming and links me to the one from the prior week. Like there's a lot of ways to keep people engaged, but if you don't have consistent content, it'll be really hard to even get found in the store.
Yeah, I've heard consistency, whether it's YouTube or podcasting. Yeah, I mean, you're starting a show, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you look at any show, right? Like in the days of synchronous the live TV, everybody looks forward to whatever, Friends on certain days, or Game of
Yep.
Thrones on certain days, or 24, or I'm dating
Yeah.
myself here. But
I like
yeah,
24.
consistent, like
Great.
Jack Bauer, he's awesome.
Yeah, I know.
it's a little ridiculous how many times he manages to save the world in 24 hours. It's a little too
Yeah,
much, you know.
it is, but I thought about it.
But it's awesome. But
Yeah.
yes, consistency is so hard. So with consistency, how do you create consistency? Are there any processes? Like for me, I kind of like today, Fridays, I just batch
Mhm.
interview. So that's like my day of interviews.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's good. It's hard because my team does a lot of this for me now, so I don't even drive that consistency. I just have, interviews show up on my calendar and they manage all that. So, I mean, for us, because we're inviting people on the shows, it's always just about continuously booking and inviting people and making sure that those guests have an experience that, is amazing and blows them away, where they talk about it afterwards, because oftentimes they're referring each other to our show. So we'll have on, like, we had on the CIO of Shell, and then he sent someone else our way, and then they sent someone else our way, and it just turns into this, really nice, like, network effect where, like, if you give someone a good experience, they're going to refer their friends, they're going to talk about it. And yes, I think the best way for consistency for us is just, doing the work and setting it up in a way that you're kind of farther ahead on your episodes. Like, you've got bookings coming up, but you're not so far ahead where the content gets outdated, because then, some people are like, oh, I'm 6 months ahead. And it's like, okay, well, do you think what you said today is going to be relevant in 6 months? Maybe,
Right.
maybe not. Depends on the content. I don't
Right,
know.
right, right.
Um,
Yeah, you don't
but
want the GameStop stuff to come out six
exactly.
months from now.
Yeah, yeah. So we always
Yeah,
have that rule of, like, we can't book too far ahead, and
yeah,
it's got to kind of be that nice sweet spot.
yeah. Yeah. Talk to, you mentioned the guest experience. So what makes a great guest experience? Describe some of the things that, people talk about and why it's a great guest experience.
Yeah. So preparation's huge. So I think a guest wants to come on and feel like they know, like what the show is going to be about. What kind of questions are you going to ask? Even if you completely go off the script, like, you still want that person to show up and feel comfortable. So oftentimes, my producers will do a prep call if the guest wants it. So we'll say, well, we'll invite on a CEO of a company. We'll offer them a prep call. If I'm hosting that show, like, I won't be on that prep call because I don't want to make them feel nervous or anything. But our producer will be on the prep call with them. They can ask any questions, go over everything, check their audio. Because a lot of people are actually a little self-conscious around their audio. Like, is it working right? You know how Zoom can kind of be weird. Like, we record on Zoom, and they'll be, their mic might not be working. They're trying to use a mic, and sometimes we're like, oh, don't use that mic. It sounds worse. And so they'll get all that out of the way during the prep call. Then when they show up on the actual interview, they've already had a prep doc sent to them that shows a lot of the questions and themes that we're going to be going through. They have, the host bio, so they know who they're talking to. They've had a lot of probably conversations already with the producer before even getting on there. So then when you have this guest coming on, they're like, you can tell they're comfortable and they're ready. And then reminding them from the very start of, like, at least for us, and this is what all of our hosts say, like, this is a no risk interview because you can start and stop when you want. If you mess up, who cares? Like, we're just here to have fun. And if your PR team doesn't want you to say something, like, you guys can cut it after the fact. Like, PR team, don't interrupt us like midway through, but write down notes. And if you don't want to share that, and that's fine. So we just want to make them feel really comfortable, where it's like they can say whatever they want, tell the best stories, and then if they or their team need to adjust it, fine, but, like, don't hold back during the interview. And then after that, it's all about communication. So, you hop off with the guest, you had this amazing interview. You make sure it's not like, you even give them pointers. A lot of times, like, even the biggest executives we interview, they want to hear pointers of, like, what's going to make a show good. And we'll even tell them, like, here's the things that we know will connect with this audience, because they don't want to be talking about stuff that no one cares about. So they
Right.
want tips. And so, yeah, knock out a great interview. And then just communication afterwards of just, here's, like, we have a Klaviyo setup that will do a lot of this for us, like, customize it for us. So then we hop off the interview, a trigger will be like, hey, here's, like, what's happening next. Our secret remote audio team in Texas is, like, taking our audio files and making us all sound like angels, and kind of makes it fun, but also keeps them in the loop of, like, you'll have an audio file ready for you to review in 5 days, like, be on the lookout. And then in 5 days, like, there goes our audio file, and here's your deadline to review it. It's planned on releasing then. Once we release it, they get some, more, another email that lets them know it's out in the world. Here's how you can help share it. Go share it on your LinkedIn, go tweet about it, go like our post. And if you want to use it, you can as well. Like, for, if your company wants to pull some clips from it, go ahead. And then following up with them even a month later and just, thanking them for coming on the show and checking in with them. And so I think just keeping that communication open, prepping them in the beginning, and then continuing the relationship afterwards is kind of how to make someone walk away and be like, wow, that was fun, that was easy. I didn't feel like there was gotcha questions. That wasn't like a news type of segment where it's like trying to get me to like say something that's going to get me fired. Like our company is so anti that. Like we do not want gotcha questions. We just want good stories. And I don't want to put people on the spot and make them uncomfortable. And because it's just like, we're not here to break news. We're just here to tell good stories and share insights that maybe like most people wouldn't hear.
Yeah. What I got out of that is, great, create a great interview experience, prep them, but also like having process to define like, the preparation, if they want to have a prep call, follow-ups, have they draft reviews, and even like when this needs to be reviewed, why, or, all the social sharing, like a lot of follow-ups and using tools like Klaviyo, or whatever, right, to have that automated. Like for me, I plan to keep this light and lean as possible. So looking into, tools like Klaviyo and automated tools for workflows is really great. Any other tools you recommend?
I mean, a lot of our project management's in Basecamp. We started in Asana and then we switched over to Basecamp, which I think works really well. We use a lot of Google Sheets for like tracking things. And of course, like all Google stuff we always use. And what else? I feel like you might know our software stuff better than I do. Putting it together for
that's separate. Yeah, I won't get into that. I'm not trying to sell anything in this show.
I'm like, I actually don't know.
Full disclosure, they're customer of Impeccable. Sure. Not trying to sell anything here.
Yeah, but so I don't really. I'm trying to think of like other things that we use, but yeah, I mean, the good one is Reply. So we use Reply.io for campaigns, like email campaigns, because you can upload a whole list and then put your email in there. It'll customize it of like, hi, Peck, I know you're from this company and whatever. So that one's really good if you have to be booking a lot of people at once and sending a lot of emails at once. But like I said, all my advice is more for, someone who is booking executives potentially that they want to have that. They have PR teams who want to review it. You have to be booking a lot of people. So like for you and your show, I'm like, you don't really need that. Like you could ask me after this interview of like, oh, do you want to review it? And I'd be like, no. And it's like, okay. So, which is what we do sometimes for some of our other shows that aren't as like high profile people. We'll just ask them afterwards, just cut that stuff out. Be like, do you feel like you need a review? A lot of times they say no. And we're like, cool. Like one less thing for us to do. So I think it just depends on who you're talking to and what they want.
Yeah. On this show, I told you it was about 50-50. Some people want to review it. Some people like, I trust you. Well, most of it's, my friends. So I'm just talking to my friends here.
I mean, so I'm like, cut out whatever you want. If I sound dumb, cut it out, but I'm not going to review it.
Tell us about your setup, the hardware. So that was like the software and the processes.
I mean, hardware, just really good mics. So this one, what is it, like a Shure SMB something, but Michael Jackson sang on this mic, so I feel like if it's good enough for him, it's probably good enough for me. So, I mean, a good mic is kind of all you need, but ours is a little bit more complicated because it goes through these like cloud lifters and into this box and into the computer. And don't ask me all that because our audio engineer set it up for me, but it's kind of intense. But you can just also have a mic and you're good. Like that's what's nice about podcasting is that you don't need a crazy setup. We only had it like this because we were having 4 guests coming into the studio at once, and we needed all the audio from 4 people being recorded, leveled correctly, and so that's why we have what we do. But just
that's for when guests came in, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What kind of in these days where it's all virtual, any software that you recommend? Because I'm just using Zoom here for simplicity. Zoom. Okay.
Yeah, I think there's some better ones coming out. We just used a really cool one. I was doing a sales kickoff call for the Commerce Cloud team for Salesforce, and it was like a live podcast segment for them, for their team, and Q&A and stuff. It was super fun, and they used something called Get Welder, which I thought was awesome because the video quality, I think I told you about this, the video quality was like really good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I looked it up. We'll pull it up and
yeah. So I mean, the only thing that I think could be a little tricky with podcasting is that if the guest X's off quickly, like sometimes you'll have a guest where it's like, oh, gotta go, like hard stop at 3 p.m. or something. I think if they X off, like you could lose the audio file, which is the case with a lot of like recording software, like Squadcast, I think is like that. And I mean, we've looked at a lot of them, but if you don't have that problem, then I feel like the video quality was like really, really high for them. So
Yeah, I'll check out. This is the second time you mentioned it to me.
I
So
know.
now it's like sometimes it's like marketing. You have to repeat it to me
I'm
before
just gonna
I,
keep selling you on a
say,
product that I've only used once. So yeah, we don't even use it yet, but I do remember being like, oh, that's good if we get further into video.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much. This was amazingly useful. I've learned definitely a lot of things, and glad to learn about the history of the company.
Yeah.
Just,
Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to hear this episode go live, and it's fun sharing the story because I can't even think if I've ever shared this really. So
yeah,
and well, for you.
The world needs to hear these stories. It's the entrepreneur next door kind of. I think there's no shortage of sites that celebrate the $1 billion unicorns, but that's not really helpful or relatable. I think a mom of 3 boys, no less, having her own podcasting company that serves this large enterprise, and her first customer being Salesforce, like that's a very impressive and inspiring story that people ought to hear.
Thanks. Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah.
Super fun.
So if you're a big enterprise, one of my clients, if you need a podcast, talk to Stephanie. I'll hook you up.
Love it.